Welcome to Blue Monday, which is kind of doubling up as a transfer deadline day show because we like that sort of thing. I'm joined by Matt Jones, Rob Vera, and right on cue, Bailey the Cat's with us as well. Just before we launch into any sort of transfer nonsense, Newcastle game at the weekend, it was very much, I think we said in the preview, Matt, leading up to this game, a lot of people were quite confident. We had an attacking team, and we were right to be confident because Newcastle were dreadful, but the same was if it gets to the hour mark and we've still not scored, the frustration creeps in and it becomes one of those games that we've seen so often before. That's pretty much how it panned out, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think we said in the preview, actually, didn't we? And this sort of relates to what we're going to be talking about in a bit. The concern was if we got to 60 or 70 and it was one of those games that you sort of looked at the bench and thought, there's no forward to bring on. There's no real attacking midfielder to bring on, really, apart from Gomez. And the one winger we did have on the bench, he thought, you'll have to throw him on if things aren't going well for us at this point in the game, was Anthony Gordon. But even though Everton were looking for a goal and needed freshening up in attack, he got left on the bench. So I don't know what that says about the manager and his thoughts on him. But yeah, overall, it was really poor, wasn't it? And just I think I said on the post-match, just a reminder that Everton that we all hate, that Everton that dashes your dreams and robs you of any sort of hope or feeling of momentum going forward and is always in the back of your mind when you start to get carried away about things. It was just a little reminder that is still there and that Everton, that version of Everton is still there. So, yeah, not ideal, mate, by any means, but not a huge surprise either, and potentially a little bit worrying, given we're not going to bring anyone in today going forward. But I think it'll ultimately how we view it come the end of the season will be determined by what happens in the next 3 games, because it feels as though these 3 games coming up now will, we said season defining a lot this season because we're doing well. But I feel as though these next 3 games really are season defining. If we get 1 point and go off the cup, then all of a sudden you're thinking mid-table, maybe stretching for European football. If you get 4 points and get through in the cup, all of a sudden everyone's feeling great again. So, yeah, disappointing day, but what happened on Saturday massively puts the pressure on us for the next 3 matches now.
Yeah, it does seem to be the one constant, doesn't it, Rob, with us, that it's sort of, we're always liable to pull a performance like that out the bag, especially when we've got a chance of like making some headway in the league. It always seems to trip us up, and it's done it again. And in a game it really shouldn't have done, to be honest, because they're a bad side. They played well on the day, but we still should have had enough with that team to at least score against them.
Yeah, well, there's no question, as you said before, we should have felt confident going in against a team like that, and we laid an egg. And really, what's saving us is sort of this collective shared mania, if you will, around the league of other sides doing, around us doing a lot of very much the same thing. That doesn't excuse it. If anything, it highlights the fact that this was once again an opportunity to take advantage, especially with games in hand. And we still have, games in hand over some of those around us, or at least one game in hand around most. So we're fortunate in that the rest of the league this weekend didn't pull away from us. And when I say the rest of the league, obviously those around us. But I think that if you can do one of 2 things. You can overreact to a single game, which you don't want to do. I mean, I think in the grand scheme of things, we are certainly having a very good season, a very competitive season, one that we all feel good about following, et cetera. But I think you'd also conversely be naive if you didn't look at not only the result, but the manner of the result. And I think you'd be naive if you didn't have some relatively merited takeaways from that, or concerns to take away from that, given the lack of options on the bench. What happens when you utilize your kind of quote regular attacking options that we all talk about wanting them to play together, but if it doesn't come off, who do we have on the bench to help change things up? other than, a couple of central midfielders or a couple of extra defenders. This is going to be that time for Carlo to have to find a way to get creative with solutions. And I don't know that you change everything just because of Newcastle, but I think we can all sort of agree that it wasn't just Saturday. I think we've all started to see little fragments and little cracks in the wall a little bit lately. And so I think you're going to start to see some rethinking here. And obviously with what we'll talk about here in the transfer window closing today, it's amazing how quickly the entire discourse changed. I remember at the turn of the year, it was, well, we're not going to do anything in January and we shouldn't, to hopefully we get a bunch of these players out, and to this past week where it's full on gone into, I can't believe we're not signing anyone. So it's amazing how quickly these things change. But ultimately, we're very fortunate at this point not to have been buried a little bit more by that performance on the weekend.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get carried away with this one result, but as you say, it's sort of more than that now, because these results have been creeping up on us over the course of the season. We've lost games. We lost to Newcastle away, lost to Newcastle at home now. There's West Ham, there's Leeds at home. It's sort of like we seem to be a lot worse at home than we are away, and that's a bit of a worry, I think, in any season. But in this season, when you can really we could make some headway in the league if we picked up results in games that we should have done. We're not doing that. We're not falling behind because, like as you saw the weekend, Brighton beat Tottenham. So, there'll be a lot of introspection at Tottenham. I think Leicester picked up a point, did they, in their last two games? Yeah. So the teams around us, they're kind of doing the same as us. So there'll be frustration everywhere. But I think another thing we were concerned about was if a team sits in, and this is what we see, the team sits in, we're not quick enough on the break to take advantage of or get around the back of them. And we just haven't got that dynamism to do that. The early part of the season, we're opening teams up for fun, getting bodies in the box, getting loads of chances, scoring loads of goals. That seems to have dried up. And it's quite easy to read now that if you sit in against Everton, you've got half a chance. Get to the hour mark, you're definitely in with a shout of the game. This transfer window now seems to have taken on a lot of importance, doesn't it, because of that? Especially because we're shipping players out. Do you think we need someone in, Matt, or?
I don't know. Just on the sort of taking the initiative thing, I just don't think we're a team that's set up to thrive in that way. We don't press high because our centre backs are quite slow, so you don't want to leave that space when you've got full backs that go on. We haven't really got what you'd say is a control and influence in midfield. Actually, I think in the early weeks of the season that was something that Gomez did quite adequately.
Yeah.
You think about Spurs away, Palace away. We each got on the ball and calmed things down and helped us get up the pitch and pen teams in. But obviously his form's dropped off. So I think if you're going to, I said this during the game at the weekend, if you're going to pen teams back, you're going to be faced with a deep sitting defence. You need to pin them back and work them around the pitch, get them wide, get the line pushing in, dropping out. You want those defenders come 60 minutes off tired legs. And Everton just are incapable of doing that. They can't sustain pressure. And they're very much a side this season that's been built towards playing in moments and scoring goals in moments and defending well. That's been our blueprint, hasn't it, for the last few weeks? It's a set piece from James onto the head of one of our centre-backs. It's a moment of brilliance from James Rodriguez. It's a penalty or something like that. That's how we won football matches. And I think teams who come in and sit, while they don't get out very often, you've got to keep them back and keep the pressure on and make them feel as though, bloody hell, there's no way you're getting out of this. That's that's what I was watching Liverpool against West Ham yesterday, and even though they've got no centre backs, you could see that it's instilled in them to get high and squeeze the play and keep your opponents penned back and don't let them out at all. And when you do that, ultimately teams make mistakes and you get more space and you score goals. Everton can't do that. They haven't got the personnel to do that. They haven't got the bravery in themselves to do that yet. Hopefully we'll get there soon. But I think in regards to the transfers, people in the comments there just sort of put up on the chat box, let us know what you think. Obviously, Josh King is still sort of up in the air, but sort of feels at this moment as though he might be going to Fulham. So it'd be great to get people's thoughts in the comments. Let us know what you think and we'll read them out and take the conversation from there, really. But I just think we're in a position now where this is a product of what we've done in recent years, where we've overspent on players like Walcott, who's obviously on loan, Cenk Tosun, who's gone out on loan today, We've stretched ourselves financially. You know, we're coming off the back of 2 years in a row where we've made £100 million or more losses. And you can't just keep spending that money year after year to get yourself out of holes. There's going to come a point where someone's going to have to say, that's enough. And I understand, you know, I think there's a position and a question to be asked about the management of the squad and the fact that we've left ourselves with effectively one, you know, we're going to call Richarlison a centre forward, 1.5 centre forwards for the remainder of a campaign where we're still in the cup competition. We're going to be playing a lot of football. But I think for me, ultimately, it's a product of the bad decisions that we've made for years now. And at some point, sacrifices are going to have to be made and compromises are going to have to be made. And Everton have decided that the compromise they're going to make is, you know, we're well stocked the centre back. We've got loads of midfielders. Up front, we're going to be a bit short to be really competitive. And that's the path they've chosen. It's a gamble. It's going to be a gamble between now and the remainder of the season if no one comes in. But when you make bad decision after bad decision and you lose money hand over fist for years on end, unfortunately, these things are going to happen. You're going to have to make hard decisions, and we are living through it now. We are living through what we said 2 years ago was going to affect the club for years and years. This is it. This is what we're experiencing now. It's not being able to go and sign someone to provide backup for Dominic Calvert-Lewin when we're in with a sniff of a trophy and a top 4 position. It's frustrating, but I think it's pretty much inevitable from what we've seen over the last few years.
Yeah, and it's affecting us all over the park, isn't it? Because that was the worst of everything at the weekend. We weren't creating chances, and we conceded pretty sloppy goals. In the scheme of things, Rob, we've got 4 centre backs there. Do you think we should be playing them all? Do you think we need to build on that solid base and just do not change that?
Well, you know, Matt mentioned the blueprint before, and that we've utilized to win us a lot of games this season. And some of you may not like the blueprint. You may think it's a little bit conservative or whatever, but it's not a terrible blueprint if you can make it work. You at a certain point, and this is sort of part and parcel with what everyone argues is Carlo Ancelotti's quote footballing philosophy, is to take what resources he feels he actually has in the squad and find the best way to play with them, the best way to win with them, etc. Again, without wanting to overreact to Newcastle too much, I think I always feel more free to say things like this because I'm thousands of miles away from any of you who are gonna, throw something at my head. But I don't have any interest in seeing a back 4 that includes both Luka Dean and Seamus Coleman really ever again, much less this season. Now, I will say that does not mean Coleman is useless or anything like that. I just think he's past the point of being any kind of full-time starter. Luka Dean, to me, still represents, especially from an attacking standpoint, one of the best left backs in Europe. So I think that in order to get, and we've had these conversations, the three of us, I know, on our group chats and what have you, with Michael Keane and Yerry Mina, you get this sort of elite defensive presence in the middle in regards to dealing with what a lot of the Premier League brings at you, which is a lot of crossing into the box, a lot of, winning aerial duels. Those guys are comfortable all day doing it, but they are, as Matt noted before, not the paciest center halves. And so you can't play a high line with them, but you can still win without playing a high line. We've been winning without playing a high line this season. You play them a little bit more positionally, in an area where they're not drifting too much and where they have their defensive flanks a little bit more covered. So that, to me, I don't see any reason why Mason Holgate isn't on the pitch, just in generally speaking, because of his leadership, his presence, etc. I think he's a better right back option and on a full-time basis. To me, the question, which everyone is tired of talking about, but I think you've got to figure out a way to incorporate him, is what do you do with Ben Godfrey? To me, Ben Godfrey needs to be in this Everton 11 some way. I understand that he is long-term a center half, but there's got to be something more you can do with him or Holgate in that regard, or move Godfrey to right back. I think that either way, having 3 center halves, even if they're playing in a back 4 like that are, that gifted in their particular manners defensively, is along with Luka Dean, to me is something you can work with. But to your point, Les, and to your original question, yes, I do think that looking at December, looking at who we were missing specifically, and look at the way we were getting results. I mean, I think some people will say, well, we just got lucky, but I think that that's an oversimplification. I think that we said, you know what, we are going to allow nothing at the back, and we are going to be opportunistic, on set pieces where we've been good all season. We're going to be opportunistic with some of our skilled players going forward. Very different than the kind of speed, pacey, counterattacking sort of blueprint that we all sort of thought was going to be there. But that's okay. I think you just have to kind of pick a lane and go for it. But I think where we will get in trouble is if we're trying to live in both worlds, where we're trying to say we're going to be really solid defensively, but find a way to play two attacking fullbacks and yet still make it work. I just don't think we have the personnel for that kind of setup personally. So I know it's not necessarily the most exciting path, and it's certainly not one that's probably long term for this side. But for this season, where you actually are within reach of something, a trophy, a top 6 or 4 finish, I don't mind saying, hey, our strength is in this position, and we're going to deploy the best players on the pitch and find a way to accommodate them. Because at the end of the day, those 4 center halves, you may look at them and say, well, they're center halves, but I would also look at them and say, that's 4 of our best defensive or 4 of our best players, period, regardless of position. So you've got to find a way to utilize those strengths and incorporate it in a blueprint for success. So I think that may be what we end up having to do, but it still doesn't necessarily address what happens if there's a weird injury or something, and that's what I think I'm most concerned about.
It feels maybe less as well, like the fact that we did so well in December with this defensive style has maybe coloured the manager and the director of football's thinking up until today, where we can get by. People won't agree with this, but you can maybe get by with Sigurdsson as a third choice striker because you're playing defensively. You can maybe get by with Luca Dean playing as a left winger because you've got Ben Godfrey at left back. We've seen earlier in the season that Alex Iwobi can play right wing back, albeit, again, I don't want to see that 3 at the back formation really for a long, long time. But maybe the manager's just thinking that if we're going to play more defensively, then it sounds quite straightforward, doesn't it? If we're going to play defensively, we probably need more defenders and attackers. And that's sort of where we are with the squad at the moment.
Yeah, I think the danger with that is obviously you just stop creating chances and you're just sitting back and waiting for maybe the odd counter-attack or the lucky break, the penalty, the free kick, the set piece. Kind of what happened against Leicester is liable to happen a lot more then, isn't it? Where you're inviting that pressure on. The way things have been going, there's been no release valve up front, has there? There's always Calvert-Lewin to hit it up to, and he can hold it up. He can win his own flick-ons. He's so good at doing that. But he needs players around him, and he's looking isolated again. You've mentioned it in the past that you think Richarlison's a centre forward, and I agree. I think he is. That could be one of the explanations for his form this season, that he doesn't like the role he's playing. He's not comfortable so much in the role he's playing, even though that's the role he played when he first came to the club. I think it was St. Domingo USA said on Twitter before, are we not counting Richarlison as a striker? And at the minute, we're not. But do you think it's time we did? I think we should go for two up front, because I don't like particularly having 1 up front. I think 3, an attacking 3, gives the wide players the chance to sort of go missing. And I haven't seen that happen. When Calvert-Lewin does get isolated up front, if you've got 2 players up front, gives the centre-backs more to think about. Now, Duncan Ferguson went 4-4-2, and it worked for a time. I think with the got now, you're probably looking at a 4-3-1-2 as the sort of go-to formation if you're going to play 2 up front. Would either of you do that? Would you think we need to start getting more from Richarlison, and maybe that's a way of doing it? More out of Calvert-Lewin as well, because he's not getting the chances, and he's on a bit of a drought now, isn't he?
Yeah, I do wonder if you're going to emphasize a more quote conventional way of playing, that maybe that's the route you go, because I'm not convinced that it's so funny, because I think today might be the anniversary or whatever, but they're showing all those clips on the social media accounts today of the Watford game where Watford, right? Where we had we were down 2-0, and then Yeri got the 2 goals, and then we got I was thinking about that breakaway goal that Richarlison scored at the end on the counter, and
Theo Walcott, Rob, come on, give him his props. Exactly. That was his best moment in an Everton shirt.
Oh yeah, sorry, it was Theo Walcott who scored it, but it was Richarlison and Moise Kean on the break. And I was just thinking about the fact that, for as much as we've talked about shedding players, you start to think about those moments where we were able to get something out of those types of players, and part of what we've allowed to leave the club, regardless of how you feel about them overall as players, is a lot of pace. And I kind of look at that and I'm thinking, other than Iwobi and Richarlison, who am I really fancying to be able to initiate or to be able to do something like that on any kind of regular basis? I mean, maybe in theory Anthony Gordon, but we haven't really seen any of that quite yet, and I don't know that that's his fault. I think it's just where he is right now. But
you're probably looking at someone like Ben Godfrey.
I mean, and I don't. I mean, he's fast, but I don't know if that's really his comfort zone. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the point, is that maybe 4-4-2 enables us to have that kind of solid defense, and then maybe has the double bonus of being able to say that if we're going to be offensively limited, we might as well, to your point, Les, not let the wings off the hook, have two strikers up top, and maybe if all we get out of playing 4-4-2 for a bit is just getting Richarlison back into scoring a little bit, then maybe you start to feel more comfortable with saying, all right, he's back onto his game. Let's start, tinkering around the edges again with what you need. But again, you can come up with a billion formational ideas and managerial concepts here. But to me, it still comes back to this notion that if your best player, or arguably your best player, is having a season like this, and he's not scoring goals, I just don't know what else you can come up with all the ideas in the world, but until you get him scoring again, I think that there's a very specific ceiling on this thing. And I think that's what has to get remedied, to me, almost more than anything else right now.
Just quickly rattle through some of the comments we've had, Les. David Snooks bid for Josh King gone through. David, if you're ITK, mate, let us know. We could do with some of that on this. Chris
no one tells us anything, do they?
No, I know, yeah. Chris Hammond saying, I'd be happy with Josh King, and I've won him always scored against us, a player who can play many forward positions, not at 100,000 plus a week, though. I think we learned that the lesson of signing players who always play well against us with Yannick Bolasie, maybe not the best reason to go inside someone. Gavin Crozier, looking unlikely we'll get anyone. We all knows DCL will get injured next game. Not even enough players in my Everton Pro Evolution Soccer squad now. Another one on Josh King from Daniel Price. I'd rather not bring in Josh King. He just end up another aging player on big money we can't get rid of. Shame we didn't look at Crepin Diatta, who thinks one of really exciting prospect playing. Salzburg, I think he's been at. You guys feel free to answer this one. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, I wanted to say something about now that everyone suddenly cares about us potentially getting incoming players here in the last 48 to 72 hours of the window. I would just like to point out the thing that everyone knows, but I think we sometimes get the anxiety and the whatever, the fever, which, I love the fever, guys. But that this gets to us at times. But if you have an opportunity to add an attacking player in January, 95% of the time, there's a reason why that player is available, and B, you're going to be getting someone with flaws, right? And so, for instance, I don't think you can evaluate Josh King as a proposition in a complete vacuum, meaning that if the way to get Josh King is a very expensive contract or a longer term obligation than you're comfortable with, of course, that's a terrible idea. If you can get him on loan till the end of the season type of, or sort of a year and a half thing that kind of benefits the player in terms of getting him back out into the market where he feels like he can maybe earn and build his value again and what have you, then that's not, a year, an 18-month deal is not going to kill this thing either. I just think that it all depends on what you can get. But having said that, I just think that if you're only hearing about this Josh King stuff today, I mean, historically, we've seen this movie so many times, guys. Like if the name is really, not that the name has not popped up in the past, but when the link, if you will, starts getting bandied about today of all days, to me, my conventional Everton wisdom tells me that it's not going to probably happen right now. It could. And if it does, I think we will have to just trust that we felt like we could afford it. But, to Matt's broader point, we're in this position in a January because of some odd factors. And some of them are our own fault. I think it will be litigated at some point, depending on how the rest of this season goes in much greater detail, just what went wrong with Moise Kean, because you can throw your jokes out about Farmers League and he's scoring goals somewhere where it doesn't matter. But I would also argue that given his age, he's sure scoring a lot of goals for someone who's his age, and we would have considered him a great prospect if he hadn't played with us already and he poisoned the well against himself, essentially, with too many of our fans. The bottom line is that for whatever reason, we and Moise Kean and Everton did not form a relationship that could withstand whatever issues popped up. And if he wanted to go, I guess you have to let him go. But here we are with all of our attacking options, from Ellis Sims to Cenk Tosun to Moise Kean, out on loan. So there's something there that has to be better. And I don't know what it is, but I'm not blaming the manager. Sometimes things don't work out, but we're in this position not just because of money, but I would also argue we're also in this position because we are paying players to play somewhere else right now. And that to me represents a failure of relationship. And those things just simply have to improve, whether it's identifying the personality fits better before we get them in, or it's making an effort once they're here to say, all right, guys, we've got to find a way to make this relationship work, because we just can't leave ourselves in a position like this again.
Well, that's the odd thing, isn't it? Because even if sort of say Marcel Brand's remit for this window was to get rid of players that aren't in the manager's plans, you've got to have a bit of a duty of care to the squad that you don't get rid of all the attackers in one go. So Nard seems to have fallen through at the last minute, but now there's talk of Anthony Gordon going out on loan to Preston, I think, wasn't it, Rob?
Yeah.
You can't, Cenk Tosun, for all his uselessness, he was another body up front. Ellis Sims, he's never been tried in the first team. He went out on loan. It seems odd to just let all the attacking, let's say all the attacking talents in the squad go and leave yourself really, really short up front for the back end of a congested season where we've seen, players can pick up injuries like really, really easily. Just a hamstring tweak, out for 2 weeks, that could be 4 games. It's negligent, doesn't it? Matt,
it feels like the sort of thinking in the medium term, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because those players getting off the books helps us financially, and I'm sure it'll help us come in the summer. And I think when it comes to Tosun, he was ultimately we play one up front most weeks, and I'd say he's probably the 4th choice centre forward. I think he's probably behind Richarlison, obviously behind Dom. And if we're being honest, if Everton had Richarlison and Dominic Calvert-Lewin injured for Wednesday's game, do you think he's playing Cenk Tosun up front, or do you think he's going back to what he did against Wolves? So I think you're looking a long way down the pecking order before you get to games. And Ellis Sims is behind Cenk, so he's probably 5th in the pecking order in that sense. So I can see why they would be willing to get them out on loan. But I think it's just the feeling and the look of having literally no other striker on the bench. It's to not be able to bring anyone on. And listen, Tosun has not changed games at all when he's been called upon in the squad, but just to not even have the option on there, it doesn't look great. And it's the risk they're running. If Dom or Richarlison gets an injury on Wednesday night, they're going to look ridiculously stupid. But again, it goes back to the fact that I think that it's hard decisions are having to be made. They'll have moved Tosun out on loan, not only with a view to saving money on wages, but with him going there permanently in the summer. Ellis Sims, they might look at him after a few months on loan at Blackpool where he scored a few goals, say, yeah, you can come in and be third choice centre forward next season. We're okay there. Might just need to go out and sign an out-and-out back up to Dom. But I think it all comes back to the final, you know, and it's boring. And I know that everyone hates listening to this kind of thing, but, you know, they are in a hole financially. Just think back to last summer when we were looking for the end of the window last summer, and we were looking for a centre back. And what the club were briefing and what we were all talking about on these shows, it was we need to get someone in on loan. People were talking about Tamori and him coming in on loan, because all the messages were that they haven't got the money to go out and spend big on a centre back. And then the opportunity came around to sign Ben Godfrey. And I think they must have looked at it and thought, we can't miss this opportunity. You know, let's stretch ourselves now in terms of the money we can spend, and maybe be short in January when we might be able to add someone, or maybe be a bit shorter next summer, because this lad is really good and we've just got to get him through the door. And that's great. It's exciting at the end of the last window when you're making those acquisitions, but there's going to be a payoff for that. There's going to have to be something to offset it. Yeah, exactly. You know, and I think maybe now that we've got a billionaire in charge, and people think about Usmanov, and we just spent money so freely down the years without any sort of consequence. It's sort of ingrained in people's heads that we can just go out and spend money on anyone we want. You know, if this was under David Moyes, would we be sat here saying, why aren't we going out and spending X amount of million on a striker? We'd all go, well, no, because we've got no money, and we know that we've got no money because we never did under Moyes. And I think it's just one of them. We've got to take a step back, and it's frustrating because the league table, the top position of it feels like it's up for grabs. The FA Cup feels like it's up for grabs, and feel like we are missing an opportunity in that sense. But again, we're living through the fact that we made so many bad decisions a few years ago, and this is our punishment for it. Effectively, you know, this is why we are where we are, and we're all dead frustrated. Blame Steve Ross, blame all that crowd. You know, that's ultimately why Everton are in the position they're in at the moment.
Well, yeah, so I suppose sort of long term on that's Mashiri's fault, because he trusted them with the money without sort of them having any of the credentials to spend that money, kind of thing. But while we're talking about finances, we're going to do something that I never ever thought to do, and it's a spreadsheet from the Esk. I've hit a new way, lads. But basically, he's looked at the squad and the players we've got available to us, and there's 2 goalkeepers, 7 defenders, 13 midfielders, and 2 forwards. Now that's a horrible imbalance, that, isn't it, in a squad? I mean, where do we even begin to put that right? I suppose maybe add some forwards, but Rob, that kind of highlights the problems with this squad, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, and I'd also throw on there that, I mean, you also paid not an insignificant amount of money for Jean-Philippe Gbamin when you got him, and he has played 1.5 league games for us. And again, I'm not faulting, like, it's a freak. Some things are just freak occurrences, you know, and hey, I hope he is actually back in training this week, as I feel like we've heard that before. I'll believe it when I start to see the pictures. But yeah, it's weird because it's not just the total bust, you know. I mean, it's not just Cenk Tosun, and you know, Theo Walcott actually found a way to become somewhat useful, but you can get somewhat useful for less than the 20 million we paid for him. You know what I mean? Like, we just spent more money than like. Another example of that is a player that I actually rate, and I think he has definitely redeemed himself this season, is Alex Iwobi. I think Alex Iwobi has a chance to still be a very good, solid player for us here in the future. But we still spent way too much money on him. You know, I mean, these things begin to add up. You know, don't even get me started on what we spent on Jordan Pickford, the Michael Keane buys and the Yeremina buys. You know, there were times where those didn't look very good. They're starting to look a lot better, but even now, I think you could probably rightly ask of, you know, at the time, spending that much money, were we really sure? I mean, there's all these things that you can point to, and Matt's right. Like, I think that this past off season, that we demanded that they reinforce midfield, and they did it. They saw an opportunity with Ben Godfrey that we would all at the time want them to take. And in hindsight, I don't think anyone, if you told me that we were going to be in this position today, but we got Ben Godfrey, I would just say, you know, this sucks today, but I'm still glad we have Ben Godfrey for the long term. So I think that the way to look at this too is that Right now we're going to go through some short-term pain to get things a little more right in the long term, hopefully. But I would say that in terms of the financial balancing of the books and the rebalancing of the squad, there's a reality in place for the summer that probably says we're going to lose a player or sell a player that we may not necessarily have wanted to, just because we've got to start considering what, and I say that as someone who absolutely is in love with one of our center halves, but I also know that at a certain point, when you've spent that much money on one position, right now, center half is a luxury for us that we probably can't carry realistically into next season. So Michael Keane, believe it or not, Michael Keane or Yerry Mina,
Holgate as well.
By the way, don't even like Mason Holgate, if you wanted away, could be sold. Like there's a lot more, uncertainty ahead than I think people realize in that regard. But as far as now and this season, it goes back to figuring out what you can do, what you can't do, and figuring out a way to get the most out of this season, because we're trying to set ourselves up for Europe next season. And to me, even with today, if we don't sign anyone, I'll still be very disappointed if we're not in Europe somehow. I think we've got to find a way.
Just one other thing I want to say, Les. I think in a weird sort of way, it is quite encouraging that we've not been, we might yet get dragged into the Josh King thing, but if Everton had signed him on loan, I would have been fine with that. That makes sense. He can play all three positions. He's got Premier League experience. Would have been absolutely fine with that. If Everton sign him on a 3.5-year deal on upwards of £100,000 a week, which is what it looks like it's going to happen with Fulham. Is he 29 years old? I think.
Yeah.
Is that right? That shows to me that they've learned absolutely nothing from what's gone on before. And he could come in and be a hit and help us get in the top 6 or 7 this season, and that's fine. You can judge whether that, spending that money on him and spending that wages on him is worth the payoff. But this is the exact type of signing that we've made in recent years that has gone tits up and left us in this position we're in now. I think Everton need to be a bit smarter than that. They might go out and spend money on him now and sign him on a 3.5-year deal and make me look like a dickhead here. But I think it's a sign of progress in some respects that they can look at that deal and go, actually, no, I'm gonna walk away from that one. Just also very quickly, Les, you had a lot of positive comments about your top tonight, Fiorentina. You're paying tribute to Gabriel Batistuta on his birthday today.
On his birthday, the old Batigol top. Yeah, I saw Barry Stevens asked, when did Lyle and Scott start making Fiorentina get it's a jumper. It's a Lyle and Scott gold Fiorentina top. That's all it is.
Just a quick Twitter transfer update. Ian Dennis of the BBC is now reporting that Everton have made an offer from their inquiry earlier today for Josh King. So it's between them and Fulham. Everton.
There you go. I told you they make me look like a dickhead. Yeah.
I thought they'd wait an hour though, at least.
It goes back to, we still have like 3 hours, right? Because it's 11 p.m. 11 p.m. right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I would say again, Matt, I think you're not, you don't look bad. I think the truth is that Josh King under the right circumstances is a perfectly fine January addition. But again, it can't be a Cenk Tosun, Theo Walcott-esque commitment to Josh King. So I don't know. Again, I don't know what it looks like. If we get him in, I will probably very quickly convert my headspace into one of being like, all right, let's get on with it. But Matt's right. Like we can't be making significant financial commitments to a 29-year-old attacking player. I mean, look, we already have signed 3 28, 29-year-old midfield players, which I have zero regrets about, especially on the Decore and the James signings. I think Alan's still got a little more to show me, and some of the things, Matt, that you said before we signed Alan about being concerned about guys at that age who play like that being injured. Well, look how long he's been out. I mean, I think that these are all very reasonable, rational concerns. But if we're making if we make a Josh King addition as part of an overall push to get to Europe this season and the commitment is not ridiculous, then I think we can get on board with it. Because if we're going to look at the glasses half full part of Josh King, it is that he is positionally flexible. He can play on the wing. He can play up top. He gives us a little something. Or we could have just not let Theo Walcott go, and maybe that would have that part kind of irks me now that he's playing so well for Southampton, is that I'm like, if I could have that version of Theo Walcott recalled from loan right now, I probably would take it, because I could, by the way, you could argue Theo Walcott could be an emergency third or fourth striker if you needed one. I mean, like, I hate wasting money, but I also hate the idea of us finishing 8th or 7th, if I'm being totally honest.
That's the weird thing. If we do sign Josh King on any sort of a deal, it seems like we've, on the one hand, got rid of Theo Walcott this season because it was like he was one of those sorts of aging cats back. He was one of those sort of players who we signed on a long-term deal for a lot of money at the wrong age. And this just feels exactly the same. As you said, Matt, it feels like if we do that, we've not really learned anything now. It looks like we're panicking a bit, doesn't it? Because there is an opportunity there this season, and if we brought Jelavic in for like the last half of the season, that season, and we were looking to do something, and Jelavic made the difference and got us into Europe, and then did nothing. You kind of look at it and go, I know it was a free, but if we'd signed him for any sort of money, you'd look at it and you think, well, do you know what? That was a gamble that paid off because it could keep us at that level then. But it is a gamble because although there's an opportunity, there's 10 other teams who are seeing this as an opportunity. West Ham have got better attacking options than us already. And they're in the same position as us. Leicester, the same. There's a lot of teams going for like 1 or 2 positions in the league. And it just seems like we need more long-term thinking. And I think...
Hey, Les, can I ask you a question financially, though? This is just a different way of thinking about it in terms of how we're making these calculations. Is it a greater risk to pay some money for Josh King, or a greater risk to not sign Josh King or or quote someone or what have you, and put ourselves in a position where we miss out on Europe, thus losing significant money? Like, I feel we're sort of damned if we do, damned if we don't. I hate being in that position, but I would argue that that's sometimes the position you're in when you're kind of right outside that top tier of teams and trying to push on from being mid-table. I mean, you have to kind of make these decisions, and it'll either work. Like, and if it works, then everyone's thrilled. If Josh King signs now and we get into top 6, top 4, no one will think a thing of it, and the move will have probably paid for itself. But if we don't, again, that's where I would like the third option, which is we do sign Josh King, but we sign him to a deal that is very club friendly, if you will. Given that there have been in the COVID era, there have been more of these little short-term contracts. Like, I don't think did Theo Walcott sign for initially like 4 years or 5 years or something? Like, I just don't think those contracts in January are realistic anymore.
Yeah, I think it was 3.5 years Walcott, wasn't he? Yeah,
it felt longer.
my opinion from the start of the month was that we should go out and get good players, whatever good players we can get in key positions. Go out and get them at the start of the month. People say there's no value in January. It's hard to get players in January, which is true to a degree, but you can if you go in early and you get them at the start. There's no value to be had if you leave it till the end, because when teams are desperate to get rid of players, and teams are desperate to sign players, and it's not a happy marriage at all. That is it. As people pointed out in the comments, I think Jonathan said King has no goals and no assists in the Championship. Then Adam says, why do people think signing Josh King from relegated Bournemouth will get us Europe?
Well, it's not about one player getting us Europe. It's more of the insurance of what won't get us Europe is Calvert-Lewin getting injured and having no strikers, I think is at least the idea behind the whole theory. But yeah, I agree. There's nothing spectacular about Josh King.
The thing it does, and while I think, first of all, going off what Rob said there about being a club-friendly deal, if he comes in, he's going to be on big money. Ultimately, he's going to be on a lot. He's in a great position as a player because his contract's up at the end of the year. There's a load of teams after him. He will see this as his last big contract. It'll be the biggest contract he ever gets in football, won't it? Because he's been at Bournemouth, he's been at Blackburn, he's on Man United's books as a youngster. But this will be his big contract and his last chance to get a big contract in football. And I think he might look at it and say, I can go to Everton and play under Carlo Ancelotti in a team that's qualifying for Europe, but he'll want big money because Fulham, according to me and Dennis, who were taking these reports from, have offered him a 3.5-year deal, And for him to turn that down
with a relegation clause.
Yeah.
And by the way, Fulham's position in the relegation race actually gives them an advantage here, because he probably would look at Fulham as, hey, if we get relegated, I'm out of this deal and I can go get a new deal in the summertime. So
exactly. So he's not going to turn that down for anything other than big money and a decent contract at Everton. That's by the by. But I think if we're trying to put a positive spin on this, if it does happen and he does arrive, then Everton are stronger ultimately than they were at the start of the window, because they'll be bringing in a player who probably doesn't get into the first 11, but is a viable, decent, proven option off the bench who the manager will call upon. It wouldn't be 5 minutes from the end like we get with Chen Tosin. You could see him coming on after 60 minutes if someone's not playing well. So the first team squad will be stronger between now and the end of the season, despite all the doom and gloom today. But it's what happens then if he doesn't do well, Everton don't get into Europe, and all of a sudden we might be sitting here in the summer going, that was a bit of a stupid signing, and we might be sat here in a few years' time doing another January deadline podcast show going, Josh King's here still. You know, he's only got 6 months left on his contract, but we can't shift him, and he's quite happy to sit on his wage. You know, that's a negative spin on it, but the positive spin on it is that if he does arrive, Everton have got a viable attacking option on the bench, who the manager clearly wants, the director of football clearly wants, and it's proven in the Premier League. That's not something they've had for the rest of the season.
Hey, what's Sandro up to? Bet we could get him on a decent deal, you know?
Yeah, I think
hopefully he's over the whole us ruining his career thing, you know? So
yeah.
Frustrating thing is we shouldn't be in this position, should we? We shouldn't be in this position at the end of the transfer window where we're scrambling around for Josh King, who's been available for 6 months.
We're not in this position if we find a way. I know there's so much more that happens behind the scenes that Everton, who are just notoriously insular when it comes to this sort of stuff. I know there's a lot more going on there, but and a player wants to go, he wants to go. I mourn for the potential of Moise Kean in the long term, but I think in this case, I'm more upset that we're now in a position to have to make a potentially financially irresponsible decision on a 29-year-old when you know, if you can find a way to pacify Moise Kean and say, look, just give us till the end of this season. Then if you want to go on loan or you want to talk about a sale, you know, now I grant you his form at PSG means that we're going to get more of our money back. But again, if we finish 8th this season, you're not going to feel great about that extra 10 million we get from Moise Kean this summer. You know what I mean? Like I wanted that to work out. It didn't. I wanted Cenk Tosun to not blow out his ACL. We could have sold him to Palace, and then we probably would have bought someone, you know, in the summertime. Some of these are our fault. Some of them are not our fault. But the bottom line is that we're in this position now, and you know, we're going to have to find a way to live with it. But I do keep coming back to this idea now, especially as we're reading these reports that Everton, or at least are still pushing on some level for this. There's a reason they're pushing, and there's an acknowledgement here from them clearly right now that they shouldn't be going into the remainder of the season without another striker. And if it doesn't come off, it'll be really interesting to see the way in which they kind of spin this, and we'll just have to kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think we sort of started the show on something that was very, very Everton in that performance at Newcastle. It's something we've seen time and again, and we'll see time and again in the future, I'm sure. And this transfer window feels that something that's very, very Everton, that, you know, we've seen this time and again, and we will see it again in the future. It's frustrating when it happens. To be positive, we're still in a good position in the league. We still won, 15 out of 24 games now or something like that?
Yeah.
You know, It's not bad. We could be in a worse position. It could all blow up against Leeds. We don't know, but this is where we are. There's still 3 hours left of the transfer window. We will see what happens.
Yeah. And by the way, guys, I think, Les, you make a really good point to end things today, which is that it's so good to be talking about problems with Everton within the framework or context of a competitive season. This has been so refreshing. As much as a Saturday really upset me, I have to remind myself, because I promised myself I would do that this season, is that I would not let one loss kind of paint or color things too much in one direction or the other, because This has been a joy overall to watch. It may not stay that way, but you're right. We've still won a lot more games this season than and we've been winning on the road, et cetera. There are things that just we need to correct. But let's be honest, if Richarlison doesn't start scoring, if we don't complete some kind of deal, or we don't, if all these things don't happen, maybe we haven't earned Europe this season or what have you. But I would also say too that given the state of the league, we're still in a decent position. You always in sports need some luck to go your way. So that's going to be true whether we sign Josh King today or not. We're going to need some luck to go our way. We're going to need some players to, step up and play better. All these things were always going to be true if we were ever going to be, finish in a good position this season. So I think it's important to remember that everything doesn't hinge on what happens tonight in the last few hours of this window.
Just just a couple more points, Les, before we wrap up. Hakon Isak Sarak, sorry I've butchered the pronunciation there, mate, saying, as a Norwegian, I can say the King will fit in better as a striker in 4-4-2 than as a right winger at Bournemouth. I've already been playing 4-4-2, I suppose that's the issue there. And finally, this one from Chris Hammond. I've not checked if this is right or not, but it's a great start if it is, saying, I guarantee King will score more than Tosin. In fact, King has scored 4 goals at Goodison, the same as Tosin.
Sounds about right, doesn't it?
Hey, you know what? Even if signing Josh King just somehow means that Bournemouth can't have him score against us, I know that seems like it can't happen. Like, didn't it feel like when Callum Wilson scored those 2 goals this weekend that it just felt like more Bournemouth screwing us again? Because that's how I felt.
Yeah, it was the ghost of Bournemouth pass, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens in the next 3 hours anyway. Probably nothing, but you never know, do you? Next up, it's Leeds away. What's the score for that match, you reckon?
Yeah, we'll do that before the game. Yeah.
Do what's the score, and
kickoff time. Yeah,
and there'll be a post-match afterwards. So join us again for that. Don't forget to subscribe and like videos. Please don't dislike them. It hurts our feelings. Thanks for watching. Thanks for everyone getting involved. Thanks to Matt. Thanks to Rob. Up the toffees. See you soon.